Good morning and welcome to the FinTech Insider Breakfast Show. My name is David Brear and today I'll be talking about...
Hey you, come on, get out. Thank you very much, Ivy. Sorry about that, guys. You can't get the help, can you? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Brear, and welcome to episode 64 of the 11FS FinTech Insider Breakfast Show. In this show, we bring you the best and the brightest from around the fintech and banking landscape every single weekday, straight into your homes at 8:30 BST, here live on LinkedIn. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Brad Goodall, who is the CEO and co-founder at Banked. On this morning's show, we're going to be talking about the next steps in open banking and what the future of fintech really is going to be about. So good morning, Brad. Sorry for that interruption, but good morning. How are you doing?
Definitely the best intro I've ever had. Thank you, David. Really good to be here.
Well, it's great to have you on. And I mean, you know what it's like having a little kid at home, right? They definitely want to get involved somewhere along the lines.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was saying earlier, if I'm lucky I've sent my 3-year-old off to nursery this morning. Otherwise, we would be competing with Paw Patrol right now.
I do love me some Paw Patrol. For everybody who is watching this over on LinkedIn, please feel free to, if you've got any questions for me or for Brad about anything that those guys are up to, drop it into the sidebar and we'll just weave those comments in and those questions as we go. Brad, can you start a little bit with sort of your background, and we'll get into Banked in a minute, but tell us what got you to Banked, if that makes sense.
Sure, yeah. So I'm originally from Australia. I spent about 15 years of my career in financial technology. I guess I started before it was called fintech. And for the most part, it was in wealth management and the superannuation and pension space in Australia. I started straight out of school. I was lucky enough to get a job in what was probably considered a startup then, although we didn't call it one. And then had some great exposure to platforms in Australia. I was involved in starting a business with some friends. Actually, it had already started, and I sort of came in a little bit later, but we grew it quite quickly. It was a challenger consultancy in Melbourne. And then I came over to the UK in 2014 and was really fortuitous to actually meet Eric van der Klee, who was founding or had just founded Level 39. And so I got this amazing network through working with Eric and the teams that were at Level 39 and Innovate Finance. And so I've been here ever since since 2014 and certainly been through some interesting times. Not being any less than one of those.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Eric's a great guy as well. Like, I think if you, for anybody watching this who doesn't know Eric van der Klee, go find him on LinkedIn. I think if there's one person who knows everybody in the industry, like globally, it's Eric in terms of connectivity. But and obviously this sort of journey got you to decide to build something, and that thing is Banked. So tell us a little bit more about it, and tell us a little bit more about the mission that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. So I helped co-found a company with Anthony Jenkins in 2016 called 10x Future Technologies, and I got this interesting exposure to the side of the banks, which was, as I said before, I was in wealth management mainly in most of my career, but I got to see the retail banking side of things, the pressure on things like cost-income ratio, and as digital was really starting to pick up, in both challenger banks, but also as it was expanding beyond that. And that happened at the same time. It coincided with open banking kicking off, becoming a thing. Open banking didn't really start until 2018, but it was just sort of there were these murmurings. And so I spent 2 years on the bank side, working with companies like Virgin Money. And then when I realized that open banking was really going to be a thing, it was too big an opportunity to pass up, to sort of leave the bank side of things and move across into what we now call Banked and the sort of that regulated third-party provider that we are, because I was really seeing open banking less for things like data and payments and more for this real next sort of phase of digital transformation where banks were having to invest in API middleware and start to interact with regulated third parties in a way that they hadn't before. Before it had been go through the procurement, whereas now they were having to have these commercial APIs, and that was just too big an opportunity to sort of pass up. And so I left 10x with some people that were there, and we started Banked on the 1st of January 2018.
Exciting, and the rest is going to be history, I guess, at that stage. Because I mean, it's been going really well, and like I say, I think you've got a really good team there in terms of not just yours, but the various players that have sort of come in's background. So, and obviously, I mean, it's been quite a few busy months for you even in lockdown, right? So, I mean, you've raised and landed some seed funding during this period, which is no short sort of mean feat during these times as well. So, like, how did you even manage that? Was it something that had happened? All the process had taken a long time before the crisis and the lockdown, and it just finalized during it, or did it come together in a different way?
Yeah, so we've been going for 2 years, and we raised some money initially in August of 2018. We got regulated in February of 2019, and we set off on this path to build to build a proposition inside of open banking that we felt was going to be differentiated. I was really lucky I know Eric Ries, the author of the Lean Startup, and I went to San Francisco in February, just after we got regulated in February 2019. And talked to him about open banking and talked to him about the opportunity that was, that was in front of us. And one of the things that he kept resonating was he kept saying, you keep talking about payments, and payments is really important. So why are you focusing on data? Like, why don't you just spend your entire time focused on payments and really go after that? And so what that meant was we stayed in I guess, sort of stealth mode, for want of a better term, for 2019. We were getting ready to launch in February 2020, and we sort of kicked off this funding process towards the end of last year, and then had all the best intentions. We're gonna launch it in February, and then of course COVID hit, and we needed some time and some space to sort of understand what that was going to be and what did it mean. We were lucky to have already secured a lead investor in Force Over Mass, and so we were very lucky that our existing investors decided to follow on. Force Over Mass held the line, and we were able to get the round away in March, which then allowed us to launch the business officially at the end of April, May. So, yeah, I mean, I think it was a combination of having some very supportive investors, but as we started to realize after understanding what the impact was going to be, was that the payment space was actually going to be a space that is especially online payments is definitely increased, and focus on digital has definitely increased, and so that's. In some ways, we're benefiting from this.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, quite a few people we've had on this show so far have seen, I mean, COVID is almost the silver lining at the edge of all of the terrible stuff in the middle, is that actually digital is being accelerated so much. And definitely with all of the opportunities that open banking brings, then, as you say, it could be a catalyst for sort of real change in that space. Is that what you're seeing so far?
Yeah, I mean, the premise behind Bank is that the thing that we're really obsessed with is the checkout. So we're really obsessed with the transaction between two parties, whether that's a business and a supplier, or a merchant and a customer. And so we've always seen open banking as a way to bring banks, merchants, and consumers into this moment in time when a transaction happens. And so I think as you're starting to see more online transactions, you're starting to see retailers see their revenues go up online, but of course, as they see their revenues go up, they also see their payment fees go up. And so I think it's putting a spotlight in areas where, bluntly, the existing payment ecosystem there's a lot of inefficiency in it. There's inefficiency from a fraud perspective, there's inefficiency from a fees perspective, inefficiency from cash flow. And so I think there's now become a spotlight on that where there hadn't been one before. And I think what open banking allows, certainly allows for us, is it's the entry point. Open banking is only a component of our platform, but it's the entry point, I think, that allows you to have a conversation with a merchant that you can talk about fees being 90% reduced, and real-time settlement becoming a thing all of a sudden.
And how is, I mean, more broadly, I guess, with the pandemic and everything that's happening with COVID, I mean, how has that affect, other than obviously learning all the words to Paw Patrol, but how has everything else been affected by that? Obviously, you guys must be sort of heads down build mode right now. So is a sort of a dispersed workforce worked for you?
Yeah, I mean, we've been very lucky. I mean, we're a software business, so I think moving to remote, certainly for our engineers, it was preference. I think one of my engineers said that they've been practicing social distancing for their entire life. So I think it's one of those things where you sort of you sit down with the team. We sat down at I think it was like the week before the official lockdown started, and said, we're gonna move to fully remote, and just seeing the team really embrace it, seeing the team embrace the challenge that we had. We're going into, like everybody, we're going into a very uncertain environment. At that point, we hadn't closed the funding, we hadn't launched, and just seeing the team really support, the vision, each other. I think, I think for us that COVID has sort of binded our team together in a way that I don't know any other situation would have. It was, it was a light switch, as it was for everybody. And I think we were really lucky that we have a great bunch of people that were able to react really, really professionally and really supportively to themselves and to the business.
Yeah, I mean, it like I say, it definitely sort of fosters sort of a collegiate approach, doesn't it? In times of real sort of adversity in the way in which we have right now. But I mean, open banking more broadly, maybe if we sort of touch on that, because I mean, it's a pretty big year for open banking. Not just here in the UK, but actually, I mean, globally. There's some comments actually in over in LinkedIn around, I mean, Sydney going live with open banking on the 1st of July, right? So, over in Australia, rather, there's ripples of open banking happening everywhere, which is for you and for the organization with Banked is a really big opportunity, isn't it? Because while I think your focus is very much kind of here right now, the things you do here, the UK is maybe a year, maybe slightly more ahead than anywhere else in terms of the changes that are coming. But it feels like there's quite a lot of changes coming with open banking more broadly.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I've seen, certainly here in the UK, is that there's sort of been two phases. The first phase of open banking was very much infrastructure. It was the banks getting ready. It was aggregators coming in and really having a clear value proposition and defining what that value proposition was. And that was sort of, how do you start open banking? How do you kickstart it? How do you do it from a efficiency perspective for developers, efficiency from banks, and how do they have invest in connectivity to legacy technology and making that real and work. I think the second phase is definitely okay, so once we have access to this infrastructure, like what can we do with it? So in our case, we just see it as it's an opportunity to start a new payments network. So in this particular case for us, it's commercially driven. So it's, as I said before, significantly lower fees and real-time settlement. But as I think you look around the globe, in Australia in particular, the thing that I'm really interested to see in Australia is, will they expand beyond, Australia, it's more about, the consumer data right, and will they expand beyond retail banks and get into wealth management? Because one of the problems that Australia has always had, we've had, for 30 years, you've had employer-sponsored pension and superannuation. And one of the hard things has always been about getting early member engagement. It tends to be something that people get engaged in, in their kind of 40s and 50s as they think about retirement. But now we have an opportunity to kind of bring all of those accounts into one space. If you can get open banking to get across, beyond retail banks, and start getting people used to managing their money and being interested in their money really early on. And so I think that's a really interesting thing that open banking could bring to bear, as it branches out, and that infrastructure play becomes about different APIs into different different organizations.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? The future, when you start sort of looking at that, really sort of breaks down into the people providing the services might not be the people creating the products, which actually becomes a really interesting dynamic, a really interesting industry, because most business cases are predicated on not only owning the customer experience and literally that language. You sort of sit when I've been in big banks in the past, it's like, yes, but who owns the customer? And it's like, well, nobody owns the customer. It's like, are you providing a service that people really want or need? Where are you adding value? But at the point where somebody different to the product creator is distributing the product, then principles around universal banking and cross-sell and upsell and actually only at 2.4 products do customers become profitable, these types of things. That whole mechanism is really sort of broken down, isn't it? Which is going to be fascinating, isn't it? Because it will change how products need to be created in order to be distributed by anybody at that stage, right? So it does lead to I think a very interesting inflection in the market, which ultimately I think will be really beneficial to to consumers, because actually choice and competition inevitably always brings down the price, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that's why I said, before, the thing that I really saw open banking for was this investment that banks were going to have to make in a next level of transformation. There was lots of talk in 2018, banks are going to be defensive or they're going to be offensive, and then it was, the smart banks are going to be offensive, and I think fundamentally, as you start to do things, you start to look at API, you start to look at cloud, and you look at the trajectory at which product engines and platforms are built, you start to realize that there is an opportunity now for banks in particular. Cost income ratio has always been a thing for them, and one way of that is to sort of shed high street branches, but another way is to monetize where their largest, some of their largest cost is, which is in their technology. And so I think seeing banks start to offer up API connectivity and commercialization strategies for distributing products on their behalf, that's definitely a bet that Banked is making, that there are banks out there, and we're certainly talking to some of them, that they will look to distribute things like point of sale finance. Can a bank compete with Klarna if you put them in that moment in time when a transaction is happening between two parties? And so I think you're right. I think that opportunity is really there now to start to see a wave of the consumer really benefiting, because there are going to be very niche focuses put on the type of experience for that particular type of customer. But to your exact point, that should start to drive down.
Yeah, and I guess that comes to your point earlier on around, well, checkout experiences. I mean, a checkout experience used to be, it's like the button on the website, but fundamentally at this stage, like, POS is everything, isn't it? Every app, even the the sort of physical to digital kind of overlap there between everybody always having a mobile phone with them. Like, checkout experiences in terms of where your where your initial sort of focus is with Banked is actually so much broader than it ever has been, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we sort of, we get a pretty big ambition, and we say that we're building a network that rivals Visa and MasterCard, and that's not, there's a technical network of that, of course, but really the network is, so in those environments, there's credit that's offered, there's data that moves, there's insurance that's offered, there's loyalty that's offered, and there's payment initiation. And so you can't sort of say you're going to compete against that if you only offer payment initiation. And I think the future of the checkout is how you really bring to life a new network. What we see with credit cards is that you're optimizing old rails for for digital, whereas this is an opportunity, I believe, a moment in time where you're starting to build new rails very specific to digital, and so seeing a world where a consumer can go and shop with a merchant and be offered, point of sale finance or point of sale insurance or loyalty, very bespoke to them, being able to move their buying data or their payment data and place that into a place that's more relevant, potentially a bank transaction history. That's the future that I think Banked believes in and wants to build. And I think that's possible because of, certainly open banking helps, and it's a start. But there are many things you've got to do over and above open banking. And bluntly, you've got to very much be obsessed with that checkout and obsessed with building partnerships, because this is a platform play and it's a partnership play. And I think you need to know that you can bring the right types of partners in at the right time as you build that network out.
No, it really is exciting. Like I say, the having two major players in that space, almost driving, being slightly better than each other in periods of time. Actually, again, it doesn't drive proper competition or real growth from a consumer perspective. So some tension on that process, or some tension or some competition to those players, again, it drives a very different outcome long term for consumers, doesn't it? I mean, one of the things that most of those players are always very slow at doing is evolving their business models as well. There's a couple of questions actually from one from Steve Brown over there. I mean, can you talk at a high level in terms of how you monetize, or what your revenue model is? Because I mean, actually the model that they've been using for such a long period has been pretty fixed, isn't it?
Yeah. So I mean, I think I like to hope, there's a a line that sort of exists for me in our vision that one day payment initiation is free, and you charge for everything that goes around payment initiation. So our current model is that we charge 0.1% of the transaction. So if you compare that to traditional credit card and debit card fees, then we bring that significantly down. But it's the ability to charge for all of the software that you can build around that. So whether that's notifying a bank at a particular moment in time that that one of their customers is going to make a payment, and offering the opportunity to give them flexibility to potentially spread those payments. Having very deep links into loyalty programs that you can then sell loyalty points and make some margin on the loyalty points. Looking at things like insurance, looking at things like data, and giving consumers the right to consent for that data to be moved into different places that they want to be moved into. And so I think it's actually not about seeing the payment as the way that's the entry point, and then it's about what features and functionality can you build around that and then go and charge for. And certainly things like think about things like marketplace payments. The delivery company pays the rider and the restaurant themselves. Today that's not available, as a specific thing if you just pull that down from APIs on open banking. But it's definitely available if you bring other platforms and providers into one another. And so we really want to be known as the abstraction layer for all of the complexity that sits behind that, and all of the opportunity around whether it's financial products or whether it's partnerships with loyalty and things like that. So that then a merchant and ideally a developer at a merchant can pull that down seamlessly and integrate it into being alongside, because this play is I'd like to think at one point down the track that it replaces the need for credit card, but I think right now it's very use case driven, and it needs to be complementary to things like Adyen and Stripe and Checkout.com.
Yeah. I mean, that's really interesting, and I completely agree, because I think payments become hygiene. When they're done really well, the payment becomes a hygiene element, and actually the value exchange that actually people are prepared to pay for. I mean, if you're creating value, you're solving a problem, people are prepared to pay for that. And that I think is definitely the right place to. But you need to solve this problem to be able to then move on to that problem, don't you? Which is
for sure.
super interesting. I mean, more broadly, I mean, you guys are very focused at the moment on the European market, aren't you? I know we've touched a little bit on Australia, but open banking is blowing up globally. I mean, how big is your aspiration here? Obviously, if you're looking at taking on Visa and MasterCards, then you guys are looking globally at where the opportunities can be for banks, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we have a line on a product roadmap that says accessibility, and bluntly, we're like 2% through that, because you need, if you're selling to a merchant who has customers from the UK and from Asia and from the US, you need to be able to offer them that proposition, regardless of just saying, oh, this is just for your UK customers. And I also think that if you're running a business that you build the infrastructure, and that infrastructure starts to become available around the world, then obviously the way to scale the business is to replicate it in different markets. The beauty about open banking in Europe and the UK was that it's regulatory led here, and that does align some interests. And so really what our belief is here is that in Europe and the UK is to prove out the model that we believe between the partners that we identify, banks, merchants, consumers, and then the affiliate partners that go around that, and prove that model, and then take that model to different parts of the world. And sometimes that model will have to be done on a bank-to-bank level. I don't think the US anytime soon is going to have all banks, have to rally around one particular standard. So it will need to be commercially driven. And so you'll have to have those proof points that you are able to prove that model out when you take it to a bank and can say there is extra value added for you and for your customers inside of this.
Interesting. Yeah, it's really, really interesting. And like I said, it's great to see this come together so quickly and really starting to get traction in the market as well. I mean, there's loads and loads of questions, Brad, over on LinkedIn that unfortunately, because we're sort of running to the top of the hour, we won't get the time to have a look. But you should jump on there and connect with these guys, answer any questions, and see where it goes. But For everybody who joined this morning, thank you so much for joining. Brad, thank you very much for getting up early, putting up with me, putting up with my daughter this morning as well. For anybody who wants to learn more information, where can they learn more about you, Brad, and where can they learn more about Banked?
Yeah, so it's banked.com, and we are Banked on Twitter, and I am on @BradGoods81 on Twitter.
Fantastic. Congratulations with the success of the business. Right, folks, that's all that we have for you today, I'm afraid, but we will be back tomorrow. Tomorrow we've got a super interesting guest, actually. We've got Ashok Vaswamy, who is the CEO of Consumer Banking and Payments over at Barclays. It's going to be a super interesting show. Ashok's always really good fun, if I'm honest, so I imagine it'll be quite entertaining. That's all we have for you today, though, I'm afraid. See you same time, same place tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe.